What's up guys, my name is Ace, and today we're going to be talking about a very important potential leak for Black Ops 7, and this is apparently Treyarch is pushing to remove disbanding lobbies from Black Ops 7. Now this is coming from the Ghost of Hope, and he does preface this by saying, take this with a very big grain of salt, which normally I wouldn't even bother covering a leak if it's prefaced by saying, take this with a big grain of salt. However, in my opinion, this is one of the most important topics when it comes to the Call of Duty franchise. And so even if there's a little bit of truth to this, if I can add just a little bit of fuel to the fire here, I'm going to do that. Now, fair warning, most of what I talk about today are things that I've talked about many times in the past over the years. So for a lot of you regulars on the channel, I'm probably going to sound a bit like a broken record here, but there's a reason I talk about it so much. It's because I feel this is such an important topic, and I'm very passionate about this particular topic, because I genuinely think this is the single most important change that they could make to improve the experience for Call of Duty's multiplayer. And yes, I think this is even more important than their matchmaking system. That's often talked about as number one. If you were to ask a random sample of online community members for Call of Duty, what's the one thing they'd want to see changed? I bet most of those people would be saying SBMM. However, I personally think persistent lobbies would have a bigger positive impact than simply adjusting the matchmaking system while still disbanding lobbies. Because disbanding lobbies would help a ton with the perception of the matchmaking system while also having a bunch of additional benefits on top of that. And I really think this is the type of thing where if they can pull this off, if this actually ends up happening and disbanding lobbies ends up getting thrown out for Black Ops 7, this is one of the big changes that could actually potentially turn the tides within the community. Because right now, the negativity is overwhelming. There are a few people here or there that are looking forward to Black Ops 7, but for the most part, if you talk about Black Ops 7 online, you're going to be flooded with comments that are negative toward the game. But this is one of the top 3 things that they could do to actually make an impact on the community's perception of the game and the franchise as a whole. So let's dive into this topic, and let's first talk about how I think this would help with the skill-based matchmaking system and why it's actually more important to me than adjusting the matchmaking algorithm itself. When looking at Call of Duty's modern matchmaking system, one of the biggest issues that people have, and have been having since Modern Warfare 2019, isn't necessarily just how strict the matchmaking feels, but more so how it leads to a feeling of the experience being heavily manipulated by that system. And much of that comes from the predictable pattern that many people have noticed over the years, and this is, at least for a lot of people, when you perform very well, it feels like you get punished by getting bumped up into significantly harder matches that you can't really keep up in. Then after playing in those matches where you can't really compete all that well and performing really poorly for a game or two, or sometimes more, then you get bumped back down and you get tossed some pity games where you get to feel really good about yourself and perform well. And once you recognize this pattern, it becomes really hard to unsee it. And it's really frustrating to feel like the game is punishing you when you perform well and then giving you pity matches when you aren't performing well. I mean, it's one thing to perform really well or really poorly if it's just like a natural, random, organic matchmaking or it's just matching you on ping. Sure, you're still going to get that variability. You're still going to get some really hard matches, some really easy matches, and everything in between. But the difference is there isn't that predictable pattern. There isn't that feedback loop where you're thinking to yourself, oh crap, I just performed too well in that previous match. My next one is about to suck. Or when you do have a really good performance, you're not feeling like, wow, the matchmaking just felt pity on me there. I didn't really deserve that. That was just my pity game that the algorithm decided it was my turn to get. With this pattern, it can really feel like your performance is largely out of your hands. It's the algorithm that's deciding how well you're going to perform in your next match. And again, once you notice that pattern, it can suck so much of the enjoyment out of the game. And this trend tends to happen most for those that are a little bit better than average. So those players are often on that line where they're able to perform fairly well against average to slightly below average players, but they're not quite good enough to hold their own in the top tier lobbies. So they end up riding that roller coaster of performing too well against average players and not being able to keep up against top tier players. Whereas for upper tier players, it seems like it's much less of a roller coaster and it's more just a consistently exhausting experience with really long matchmaking times and a very inconsistent connection experience as well. And that's a bit of a recap of some of the worst parts of the matchmaking system in modern CODs. If we had persistent lobbies that stuck together after every match instead of automatically disbanding and searching for a new game, it would fix most of those complaints that I just talked about. Immediately, we would see a lot of consistency return to the game, because if you're sticking with the same lobby game after game after game, there's not going to be nearly as much of a roller coaster effect because it's not pulling you out and searching for a game that it wants to put you in that's likely very different from the experience you just played. And while, of course, some players will still leave between games and new ones will join, so lobbies do evolve and change a little bit over time, That's generally more of a gradual shift that you see over the course of a bunch of matches, rather than playing in an extremely easy lobby one match and then an extremely difficult lobby the next one. It's a much more consistent experience, and you can judge your performance a lot better as well on a game-to-game basis because you're largely playing with and against the same people that you just played with and against in the previous match. On top of that, long matchmaking times become a lot less of an issue because once you find your lobby that you're happy with, you can just stay in that lobby for hours and hours on end potentially if you wanted to, and therefore you only have to matchmake once. And an added little benefit to that is I really like the consistency of the lobby timer that we had back in the day when we had persistent lobbies. So after you'd finish a game, you'd have like exactly 1 minute, for instance. You knew it would be exactly 1 minute until your next match is loading. So that would give you time to do what you need to do for a minute. Whereas without that, sometimes you get thrown into another game immediately. So there's no time to do anything. Whereas other times it takes like 5 minutes to find your next match. And that inconsistency is really frustrating as well. And that would be eliminated with persistent lobbies. And then the last issue this would at least largely fixed is connection inconsistency. If you get into a lobby where you have a good ping, you can stay in that lobby on that same server, on that same ping, again, for hours at a time if you choose to stay, rather than having a great connection one game and then the next game you've got quadruple the ping you had in the previous game. And that's not an exaggeration. That's something I experience a fair amount in Call of Duty. One game, I will have a 20 ping. That's the best ping I can get in Call of Duty based on my location. And then oftentimes I will find myself in the next game on a 90 ping. And there's nothing I can do to control that. I can't choose to stay on that 20 ping. I just get what the system gives me. And that inconsistency is incredibly frustrating. So right there, we can already see a big list of things that persistent lobbies would essentially fix with the matchmaking system. However, on top of that, we've got other benefits, and these are primarily community-related benefits. With Call of Duty, the sense of an in-game community was largely destroyed the moment Modern Warfare 2019 came out. And coincidentally, that is the year that we got Disbanding Lobbies for the first time, and that in-game community used to be a huge focus of Call of Duty. But now, there's no more rematches, there's no more developing friendships or rivalries after playing back and forth with some of the same people for hours on end, often leading to a friend request, so you end up playing with that person again in the future. And I've heard countless stories over the years of people becoming lifelong friends after initially, like, quote-unquote, meeting in Call of Duty. And I've even met several people that I met in-game, although it was also partially due to YouTube, but there are plenty of people I've met in real life after meeting them for the first time playing Call of Duty, and that just doesn't really happen anymore, at least not nearly to the level that it used to back in the day. And that's really sad, because I think that was such a big pillar of Call of Duty back in the day. And on that note of developing friendships and rivalries, a lot of people say, well, I don't even use voice chat. Or especially now, there's no point in using voice chat, because you're probably just gonna get voice chat banned. But with that, you don't even need to be talking to other people to experience that sense of developing rivalries or friendships in the game, because as you play with the same people match after match, you start learning their playstyles. You start learning how to adapt to the playstyle of certain enemies, or sometimes you get some teammates that you mesh really well together, or oftentimes there was a mix as well, where one game, you would have that nemesis on the other team that you just couldn't seem to get an upper hand on, or you had a lot of back and forth with that player, but then the next game, they end up on your team, and now you're working together to dominate the other team. And again, situations like that would often lead to a friend request and playing with that player in the future. And then even removing the social element from the equation when it comes to this, from a gameplay perspective, there's so much more depth to the experience when you're able to take the time to learn the patterns of play from various people that you've been playing with and against, and making targeted adjustments to your gameplay style or your loadout to specifically counter that particular player and how they've been playing. And then on top of that, there's what I like to call the story of a gameplay session. I still remember many instances way back in the day, we're talking like a decade plus ago in Call of Duty, where there'd be an intense back and forth over multiple matches between me and my party versus the enemy's party, or sometimes even as a solo player. It'd be me as a solo player versus another solo player that was really good on the other team. And it was basically a fight to see who could survive the longest in that lobby before leaving, like who was gonna win out in that lobby. And then it was such a good feeling when you finally made that enemy player or that enemy team leave the game after getting the upper hand on them. It felt like you could piece those matches together and form sort of a story of your play session, and that leads to a significantly more memorable gaming experience compared to a disjointed and consistently inconsistent pile of matches that have no relation to each other and no story behind it. So putting all of that together, you can really see just how much of an impact disbanding lobbies has had, at least for many people. I know for some of these points, some people will say, well, I don't really care about that stuff. Like, it's not a big deal. I don't adapt to people over multiple games. I have no interest in talking to people or developing friendships or rivalries. And that's fine. There might even be some people out there that prefer searching for a new match after every game. The nice thing about having persistent lobbies, though, is it gives the power back to the player. So if you like rematch making after every game, you have to press, what, 4 buttons after a match in order to just search for a new one? I think that's a totally fair trade-off that you would have to press 4 buttons to do that, if it means that for the people that do want to stay in the matches, they have the ability to do that. Now, anytime this topic comes up, you'll often see people saying, well, what about quick play? You can't have persistent lobbies and the quick play filters because everybody's got different gameplay filters. They're going to have a different selection of game modes. So how do you have those people all in the same lobby? And many even believe that this is the primary reason that we have disbanding lobbies. And while I'm sure it is a factor to a degree, quick play can absolutely coexist with persistent lobbies. And there are several ways that this can be done. One option is make it so everybody that just has one game mode selected on their gameplay filters, they will automatically stay in the lobby after a game, whereas anybody with multiple selections will get pulled out of the lobby and they'll rematch make again. That's definitely not my preference, but it is an option. Another option is quick play can just be a method of rolling the dice when you match make. And once you get into a lobby, you're now in that lobby. It will persist game after game if you decide to stay, and it will stick with the same game mode game after game. So if you have team deathmatch and domination selected and you get into a domination game, well, now you're in a domination lobby. If you want to roll the dice on your matchmaking filters again, like I said, you have the power to do that by pressing 4 buttons. You can just back out, search again, it will roll the dice again, and you'll get what you get. Or on top of that, there's also what I call like a hybrid option here that gives maximum player control, and this would be to provide a setting that's a toggle so people can opt in or opt out of staying in the lobby versus automatically being pulled out of the lobby after each game to search again. So for those that want to automatically get pulled out, they can turn that on for themselves, and everything for those players will behave exactly as it does now with the current system. Whereas for everyone else that chooses to stay in the lobbies, which I would hope would be the default option, they get to stay in those lobbies, which we currently have no ability to do that. Now, another common thing that comes up is why not a compromise here? Why not a vote to stay with your team option or vote for a rematch option? Well, Modern Warfare 2 tried this with a vote to stay on your team option toward the end of its life cycle. And it was a flop because people rarely interacted with it. It's something you had to actively opt into after every single game. And having the ability to vote to stay with your team doesn't really address any of the issues that the persistent lobbies solve that I just talked about. You're still going to be matchmaking again, this time just with that team instead of on your own. So you're still going to run into a lot of that inconsistency. It's still going to be rebalancing based on your skill level after every single match. It just doesn't address the issue, and therefore I don't even care for a compromise when it comes to this. I just don't think that provides the solutions we're looking for. Now, with all of this in mind, you might be wondering, why have they stuck with disbanding lobbies for so long? Why do we even have them if there are all these negative impacts on the game? And I can only really speculate here, but I think there are a handful of reasons. And one of them seems obvious, and that is it allows the matchmaking system to have full control over the player's experience, and they likely have data that suggests that it's better overall for retention if they can have that control on a match-to-match basis and make sure you're getting that experience that they deem to be best for retention. I think the problem with that is it may look good when looking at short-term tests, but it doesn't factor in the long-term, bigger picture harm that this system has in general. Additionally, another potential good reason to have disbanding lobbies is, in theory at least, it maximizes the number of players that are in matchmaking at any given time, because now literally every person after a match is forced into the matchmaking system instead of just interacting with matchmaking once and then sticking with the lobby for the rest of their gaming session. Now, in theory, this should lead to faster matchmaking times, but in practice, that's clearly not what we're seeing in modern Call of Duties, because search times are often significantly faster in pre-disbanding lobbies Call of Duty games, even when the player count in those games is minuscule compared to the current player count with the current Call of Duty game. And this is likely where SBMM is coming into play and causing the matchmaking time to be significantly longer than it could be. So I believe in reality, this upside to disbanding lobbies has really nothing to do with improving matchmaking times and everything to do with making sure there are more people in matchmaking, meaning the skill-based matchmaking system can work more accurately by being more likely to find similarly skilled players that are also in matchmaking in that moment. Now, another argument I've heard that does make sense to me, and this is probably one of the bigger reasons, is by having disbanding lobbies, it's a more efficient use of the servers. And when looking at the scale of servers that are used for Call of Duty, it would likely save them a good chunk of change. And the idea behind this is servers are just spun up on an as-needed basis. So when a match needs to be formed by all the people that are currently in matchmaking, they can spin up a server, make that match. Then the moment that game's over, they shut that server down, and everybody goes back into matchmaking, where they can again spin up another server, or they can distribute those people across existing games. And this does sound more efficient than having a bunch of persistent lobbies that aren't filling up because there are fewer people in matchmaking to fill them. So that would just be a bunch of wasted server costs, and it might seem minor, but again, when you look at the scale of Call of Duty, that probably adds up over time. And then on top of that, another reason that they may have been sticking with disbanding lobbies for so long is quick play, but we've already discussed that. So as we can see, there are reasons for having disbanding lobbies, but those reasons don't seem to really be helping the general player experience and the big picture of the Call of Duty brand. Just like with this modern matchmaking system, I think it's been working well for them short term, as the loyal COD fans and addicts have been clinging to the franchise despite hating it more and more year after year. But for many of them, they just kind of feel like they're locked to the franchise or they're buying it out of habit. But I think we are seeing a lot of that long-term burnout really hit hard. And as I said earlier, the negativity in the community right now is overwhelming, and I think the worst I've ever seen it overall. Even worse than the Infinite Warfare year. So this is why I really hope that this leak is true and that Treyarch is actually pushing for this to change. This is something that's highly unlikely to be something that Treyarch has just direct control over, which would make sense going along with the leak that they are pushing for this. I think that's more of a big picture Call of Duty decision rather than an individual studio decision. So I hope that leak is true, I hope they're pushing for it, and I hope they're able to make something happen with that. Because I really feel if they want Black Ops 7 to be a big success, at least with like the dedicated community, we're gonna need to see a big win. Not just these little wins we've been getting, like them updating the TED skin, for instance, but a big win, like persistent lobbies. Now, of course, these are all just my thoughts on the situation, and this is where I want to hear from you guys in those comments down below. How would you feel about having persistent lobbies return to Call of Duty with Black Ops 7? Would this be a big deal for you? For those of you that are feeling negative about the game, would this get you looking at the game in a much more positive light? Or maybe not so much. And if not, what is the one thing that could turn that around for you, if anything? Just let me know down below. If you enjoyed the video, a like rating is always appreciated. And don't forget to subscribe for more if you haven't already. I'll talk to you guys next time.